When the Alter Rebbe was a young child, he studied by various Malamdim, various teachers in his city. He went to the local cheder, and he went from teacher to teacher. Then came the point where the Alter Rebbe's father, Reb Baruch, chose to send the Alter Rebbe away from home, that he should study in the place of Torah. The place that he chose was the city of Lubavitch. And there he would study with Rabbi Yisachar Dov Kabilnika. This Rabbi Yisachar Dov was incredible going. He was a genius and a Torah giant. And it's interesting to note that Chassidim Chabad are called Lubavitch Chassidim because the Rebbes of Chabad lived in the city of Lubavitch. But actually the Alter Rebbe was never in the city of Lubavitch as a Rebbe. The first Rebbe to live in Lubavitch was the Mittel Rebbe, which was his son, and Mamala Mokim, his successor. The Alter Rebbe lived in the city of Lozhna, he lived in the city of Ladi, but he never lived in the city of Lubavitch as a Rebbe. However, the roots were in Lubavitch, because as a child, the Alter Rebbe studied with Rabbi Yisachar Ber in Lubavitch. In fact, when the Mittel Rebbe settled in Lubavitch, this was at the time that shortly after the Alter Rebbe's histalkus, after the Alter Rebbe's passing, at that point the Alter Rebbe and his entire family and thousands of Chassidim were running away from Napoleon, and the Alter Rebbe was nostalgic, and then the Mittel Rebbe was looking for a place to settle, and he came to the city of Lubavitch. When he came to the city of Lubavitch, as he came in, he stopped by a certain piece of land which the houses that stood there were burnt down 2 years earlier. And he stopped at a certain place and said, in this very exact spot, there used to be a shul, and here, 58 years ago, Rabbi Yisachar Ber learned Torah with my father. And as I was making my preparations for this journey to select a place, to choose a place, to settle, the Alter Rebbe came to me and said that when I come to the city of Lubavitch, that's the place that I should choose to settle. And he gave a bracha that this should be the city for the Nesiim, for the Rebbes of Lubavitch, for many years to come. Rabbi Yisachar Ber was actually a student of the Baal Shem Tov. And when he was by the Baal Shem Tov, he told him that he will be learning with the Alter Rebbe. The Baal Shem Tov gave him very specific instructions how to learn and what to learn with the Alter Rebbe, but he also cautioned him that he shouldn't tell him anything about the Baal Shem Tov. He told him that the Alter Rebbe should not know about the Baal Shem Tov from him, and he should know that he's a student of the Baal Shem Tov. When the Alter Rebbe became 11 years old, Rabbi Yisachar Ber brought him back to his father, Reb Baruch, and he told him that he has reached such a level of Torah study that I can now not offer him anything. He doesn't need me anymore. So Alter Rebbe came back home, and he studied with his grandfather and with his father, Reb Baruch. When the Alter Rebbe was a young child, yet going to Cheder, he loved the field. And Alter Rebbe found himself a little place in the field between the trees. That's where he would sit and go over, review what he learned in Cheder. So when he came back from the city of Lubavitch, back to his own hometown to study there, he found himself again a place between the trees, in the field, and that's the place that he designated for himself to sit and study Torah. The place that the Alter Rebbe chose to work, to sit and study, was near the place of work of two people who appeared to be very simple people. One was Avram Leib, the potter, and the other was Rabbi Eliyahu Ber, the weaver. Simple people, and they worked in that area. Also, from time to time, the Alter Rebbe said, he would go to the forest, to the woods or fields that were not far from where he lived, and he would meet another person who appeared to be a very simple person. Every time he found him, he was always deep in thought. His name was Reb Zundel Aaron, the shepherd. When the Alter Rebbe was in the city of Lubavitch, that's when he discovered that there's such a concept of hidden tzaddikim, people who on the surface appear to be very simple people, seem to be ignorant of Torah, but in truth, they're hidden tzaddikim. They're in fact Torah giants, but they hide their identity. One time the Alter Rebbe was sitting in his place between the trees, learning a very deep concept of Kabbalah, and he hears a voice, very sweet voice. And he went slowly, following the sound, and he sees there is Reb Zundel Aaron the shepherd sitting under a tree, and he's studying Torah. And he's studying with such joy, and his face is literally radiating. And that's when he realized that Reb Zundel Aaron is definitely one of those hidden tzaddikim. The first impulse of the Alter Rebbe was to get closer to him, to get to know him more, and to know more about his way of learning. But then the Alter Rebbe decided he wants to be hidden, doesn't want anyone to know who he is, so he's not going to interfere with what he wants to do. But from that point on, the Alter Rebbe became much more aware of hidden tzaddikim. And it created within the Alter Rebbe a stronger desire to live that kind of life, and that's where he found himself with a stronger desire to follow the way of Chassidus. The Alter Rebbe had a grandfather, his name was Reb Moshe, who was also a great Torah giant, but he had no connection to the Baal Shem Tov or Chassidus. And the Alter Rebbe respected him tremendously, and he loved to hear the way he taught Torah. But one thing which bothered him very much was when he observed his way of Yiras Shamayim, his way of serving Hashem was very dry and very cold. And when he compared that to these people who he observed as hidden tzaddikim, he loved these hidden tzaddikim and the way of their serving Hashem much more. And from time to time he began to recognize more and more who these hidden tzaddikim were. A lot of these people would come to his house, visit his father, and from time to time the Alter Rebbe began to develop a very sensitive eye to recognize who these hidden tzaddikim were. One time when the Alter Rebbe was sitting and studying, Avraham Leib the potter, who he always thought was a simple person, walked over to him and began to explain him what he was studying. And it was incredible the way he explained it. And he said to Rabbi Avraham Leib, "Why are you hiding your identity? Why do you appear to be an ignoramus?" He said to the Alter Rebbe, "When you grow up, you'll understand. And I want you to know that Rabbi Eliyahu Ber, the weaver, who also seems to be a simple person, he has vast knowledge. He's Baki in Bavli, Yerushalmi, Rambam, the Tur, Shulchan Aruch. He knows it all by heart. He has a phenomenal memory and a phenomenal brain of grasping things very quickly. The Zundel Aaron, the shepherd, he has a very deep mind, a phenomenal deep mind." All this had a tremendous impact on the Rebbe, Alter Rebbe, want to become more and more involved with that way of life. When the Alter Rebbe was 11 years old, that's also when he began to get involved in Askonas HaKlal, which means in doing things for the public. Reb Moshe, who was the Alter Rebbe's son, used to write memoirs. And in his writings, we find where he writes that he heard from an older person, Reb Moshe Ivanska, that when he was in Lozhna, on a Yerid, it was a fair where people came, merchants came there. He saw the Alter Rebbe, who was only 11 years old, standing on a wagon and talking to crowds of people. They all gathered to hear what he has to say. And what was he saying to them? They should not be involved in buying and selling, but they should be more involved in working in the fields. And that should be their way of work. And as a result of the Alter Rebbe's talking to them, many of the people in that area actually changed their lifestyle and bought pieces of land from Baruch, and they settled there and started to work in the field. In fact, there were many Yidden who were refugees. They were running away from their countries where they were chased out, and they settled in the land near the Baruch's land. And Alter Rebbe encouraged these people that they should buy fields, and that should be their source of parnasa, working in these fields and working in the gardens. He encouraged these people to do that, and he encouraged his father, Baruch, that he should help them in any way possible. And they settled in this area which was near the White Well, or the White Spring. Why was this area called the White Well, or the White Spring? There's a story behind that, which is also connected where we see the greatness of the Alter Rebbe as a child. And the story is as follows. There was a spring of water near the city of Lozhna, which was a source of water for the animals and the people in that area. The sheep, the cattle used to drink that water, and the shepherds used to wash themselves in that water. One day, there was a sorcerer by the name of Akin, who lived not far from this area, and he used his power of sorcery to ruin the water. So one day the water turned black, all the sheep and cattle that drank the water became sick, a lot of them died, a lot of the shepherds that washed themselves in the water developed different diseases, skin diseases, and the situation was very critical for everyone. All the Yidden who had settled in this area didn't have from where their cattle and sheep can drink from. And also Reb Baruch, the father of the Alter Rebbe, his cattle and his sheep, they didn't have any water. A few days later, the situation changed. What happened was the Alter Rebbe was with his younger brother. The younger brother of the Alter Rebbe, when he grew up, he was known as the Fetter Maril, Uncle Maril. He was the author of the Sefer Sheres Yehuda. And they were sitting together in an orchard. There were many trees there with fruits, but this was the 4th year since they were planted, and in the 4th year you're still not allowed to eat the fruit of the trees. But there was a woman working there, a non-Jewish woman. She wasn't aware of this, and she took an apple for herself, and she also gave the child, the Maril, who was a child, she gave him an apple to eat. He made a bracha, he ate the apple, and then he ran to the Alter Rebbe, who was his older brother, and he asked him, what is the bracha achrona, what's the after bracha that I make after eating an apple? Alter Rebbe said to him, where did you get the apple from? And he said that the woman, the non-Jewish woman who works there, she gave me the apple that she cut off one of the trees. Alter Rebbe was very upset, and he explained to his younger brother that you're not allowed to eat the fruit of this tree. And therefore you have to do tshuva for what you did. And Alter Rebbe said to him, I'll tell you what to do in order to do tshuva, and it should be a tikkun for what you did wrong. He told him to accept upon himself that from now on he will never eat any food or drink any drink without verifying before that it's kosher. And the Maril accepted that upon himself, and everything else the Alter Rebbe told him. Then the Alter Rebbe said, what you should do now is immerse yourself in a mikveh. And the Alter Rebbe said that he himself also wants to table himself in the mikveh. And he explained to his brother that although he didn't really eat from the tree, but there's two kinds of mikveh. There's a time where a person goes to the mikveh to purify themselves and to transform themselves from impure to pure. And there's a time where even though there's no impurity, nevertheless, there's a point in immersing yourself in the mikveh to reach a higher level of purity. The Alter Rebbe added that he feels that right here under this mountain, there must be a well, a spring of water. And if we dig deep enough, we'll find it. So the children got together, they started to dig until they found the well. The water came up, and they had their mikveh there. And not only did they go into the mikveh, but then people brought the cattle and the sheep to drink from this water. And the shepherds began to wash themselves in this water. And not only that this water was good, but actually healed all those that drank from the water. And it healed the skin of the shepherds when they washed themselves in this water. So because the water that came up, this spring, was near a white stone, That's how it got the name, the White Spring, the White Well. And near that area, there were all these pieces of land where these families settled, and they got their parnasa from working in the fields. When the Alter Rebbe was 13 years old and became Bar Mitzvah, it was a very big celebration in the Alter Rebbe's home, and many great Rabbanim, great rabbis, and great people came, great Torah scholars came to participate in the Bar Mitzvah. They came from the city of Vitebsk, the city of Polotsk, the city of Minsk, and the greatest Torah scholars were there. In fact, the Alter Rebbe's brother, the Maharil, had written 3 volumes, which were all answers that the Alter Rebbe gave to people during this Bar Mitzvah. During the Bar Mitzvah, which they celebrated like Sheva Brachas, 7 days they celebrated the Alter Rebbe's Bar Mitzvah. The great scholars were there, all spoke words of Torah, and they gave over their insight in Torah. And the Alter Rebbe himself, as a child, he was 13 years old, he gave over his insights in Torah, which was far superior than anything that anybody else said at that gathering. And they gave him the title Rav. And they wrote down in the diary of the Alter Rebbe's city, every city kept a diary. They wrote on the Alter Rebbe, Tana Upolig. The meaning of this phrase is, we know there was an era of Tanoim. Those are the rabbis who wrote the Mishnah. And then there was an era of Amoraim. This is a later era of the rabbis who wrote the Gemara. And the Amoraim, because it's a later era and they're a lower level, they don't have the authority to argue, to disagree with those who are considered a Tana. Rav was someone who lived in between. He was at the end of the era of Tanoim and the beginning of the era of the Amoraim, and therefore there's some that are by the opinion that he cannot argue against the Tana because he belongs to the Amoraim era. But the Gemara says, Rav, Tana Upolig, he is considered a Tana, and he does have the authority to disagree with those that are Tanoim. And this is the phrase that they use to describe the greatness of the Alter Rebbe. They said about him, he's like Rav, Tana Upolig. After the Alter Rebbe's Bar Mitzvah, he traveled to his uncle, who was Rabbi Yitzchak Yitzchak, and lived in the city of Vitebsk, and he spent some time there and learned with his uncle. The uncle, Rabbi Yitzchak Yitzchak, was also a student, a Talmud of the Baal Shem Tov, and he used to teach him different things, and the Alter Rebbe said that what he taught him had a tremendous effect on him. It steered his neshama. It had a tremendous impact on him, but at that time he didn't realize that what he was telling him were the teachings of the Baal Shem Tov. Because he himself, even though he was a student of the Baal Shem Tov, Rabbi Yitzchak Yitzchak, but he wasn't allowed to expose that and tell that to the Alter Rebbe. He wasn't allowed to tell the Alter Rebbe about the Baal Shem Tov and about the fact that he's a student. The Baal Shem Tov cautioned Rabbi Yitzchak Yitzchak that he should conceal him from the Alter Rebbe. And the Baal Shem Tov said that he had a lot of pain from the fact that the Alter Rebbe couldn't know him. But that's the way it's supposed to be. In fact, Reb Baruch, his father, many times wanted to bring the Alter Rebbe to the Baal Shem Tov, and he gave him no permission to do that. And the reason he gave was, he said the Alter Rebbe is not supposed to be my student. He will be a student of my Mamala Mokim, of my successor, which is, of course, the Mezritcha Magid. In fact, Rabbi Yitzchak Yitzchak used to come to the Baal Shem Tov. His time in the year to come visit the Baal Shem Tov was always Shavuos. He would either come once a year on Shavuos or once in 2 years. But the time that he came was Shavuos. And every time he came to the Baal Shem Tov would inquire specifically on the Alter Rebbe, of what's happening with the Alter Rebbe, and he would caution him and remind him not to tell the Alter Rebbe about the Baal Shem Tov. And he shouldn't tell him about the Derech of Chassidus. The last time that Rabbi Yitzchak Yitzchak was in the city of Mezhebush by the Baal Shem Tov was on the last Shavuos, the Shavuos of Tov Kuf Chof. That was the Shavuos that the Baal Shem Tov was nostalgic. Shabbos before Shavuos, it was Parshas Bamidbar, the Baal Shem Tov, after Mincha, spoke privately to the Mezritcher Maggid and Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak. And he said to them, from the day that the Neshama Chadasha, the new Neshama, had to come down to this world, and come down from its high place in Chochmah Vatilus, very high level, and the highest level in the highest of the spiritual worlds, when this Neshama had to come down in a guf, in a body, and my Talmud Reb Baruch and his wife Rivka, they had the schus that this holy Neshama should be their child, Shnei Zalman, I had Mesiras Nefesh for this Neshama. And this is the Alter Rebbe. But he is yours, talking to the Maggid of Mezritch. In other words, he will be your student, but he has to come to you on his own. Not that someone else will push him to that. He has to come there on his own. But when he comes, you should know what kind of keli he is. In other words, what his spiritual capacity is. And then the Baal Shem Tov told him a number of things, instructions, of how he should guide the Alter Rebbe, and how he should guide him in a way that he'll be able to succeed in the special mission that he has. So the Alter Rebbe really never knew all this time that the people who were learning with him and the people around him were students of the Baal Shem Tov. He didn't know about the Baal Shem Tov. The first time the Alter Rebbe heard about the Baal Shem Tov was in the month of Elul, Tov Kuf Chof, which means 1760. That was a few months after the Baal Shem Tov was nostalgic. Only then did his uncle, Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak, start telling them about the Baal Shem Tov and the way of Chassidus. Many Chassidim observed that the Rebbe never personally saw the Rebbe Rashab, which is very strange because at the time that the Rebbe Rashab was nostalgic, the Rebbe was 19 years old. And it's not understood how is it that he never saw the Rebbe Rashab, even though this is something which the Rebbe never explained, and it's only something which you can speculate, but many people thought of comparing this, that just like the Alter Rebbe, because he was meant to be a Talmud of the Maggid, therefore he didn't personally become a Talmud of the Baal Shem Tov, perhaps this is also the thing that the Rebbe also never saw personally the Rebbe Rashab. And of course, this is only an observation and thoughts that Chassidim share with one another. After all this, the Alter Rebbe's name became very famous as an incredible genius, an incredible Torah scholar. And Rabbi Yehuda Leib Segel, who was one of the very important people of the city of Vitebsk, he was one of the wealthy people, he chose to take the Alter Rebbe as his son-in-law. The wedding took place on the 12th day of Menachem Av, Tov Kuf Chov, 1760, and it was on a Friday. That was the day of the Chasana. And after the Alter Rebbe's wedding, he relocated and lived in the city of Vitebsk, and his father-in-law supported him. His father-in-law, who was a wealthy person, gave him 5,000 gold coins for his naden. But the Alter Rebbe made a condition that once he gives him this 5,000 gold coins, he should have the full authority to make his own choices what to do with this money. What did Alter Rebbe choose to do with the haskama, with the agreement of his wife, Rebbetzin Sterner? He chose to take this 5,000 gold coins and use it to help people settle in different fields and to draw their parnasa from working in the fields. So with this money, he'll help them buy fields, help them buy the animals that they need to work on the field, help them all the equipment that's needed. And in this way, the Alter Rebbe succeeded in establishing many settlements near the city of Vitebsk, along the river Dvina. All this was established through the money of the Alter Rebbe. And then from time to time, the Alter Rebbe would go to people and encourage them to stop the business that they do on the streets and try to find their source of parnasa from working in the fields. Then he would go to these settlements. Most of the people that lived there were simple people, and he would encourage them to set aside time learning Torah, learn Chumash, Medrash, Agada, because these were people that were not on the level of learning Mishnah or Gemara. After the Alter Rebbe got married, about 2 months later, there were two incidents that happened which made the Alter Rebbe famous between the upper class, the non-Jewish upper class in that area, the scholars, the scientists, because of two incidents that happened with the Alter Rebbe. At that time in Lithuania, there were only 3 universities. All the universities were privately owned by noblemen in different areas. One of the universities was owned by the nobleman Sheksinski, and this was near Vitebsk, which was near where the Alter Rebbe lived now. This nobleman had a beautiful, beautiful palace, and in the courtyard of this palace, there was a huge clock, a sundial. And it's already been 2 years that there was a mystery with this sundial. Every day, 2 o'clock, it stopped working. 5 o'clock, it started working again. And the nobleman, Sheksinski, had invited professors, scientists, the most famous, brilliant people that he knew. They should come solve the mystery and find out why it stops working. And nobody could figure it out. When he heard that Yehuda Leib Segel, who was known in the area, had a son-in-law who was young but brilliant, he thought maybe he could figure it out. And he invited him to come to figure out the problem with the sundial. Initially, the Alter Rebbe refused to go, and he said, today they have this question, tomorrow they have another question, after tomorrow another question, and it'll just cause me to stop spending my time on Torah study and spending it more with them. But after a lot of begging and pleading and persuading and promising that they won't bother him more, the Alter Rebbe agreed to go. When he came with his father-in-law to the nobleman, although the Alter Rebbe knew the language, Polish, nevertheless, he refused to speak Polish and he spoke only in Yiddish. And his father-in-law had to be the interpreter. The Alter Rebbe looked at the sundial and he investigated and inspected it for a number of hours. Then the Alter Rebbe said the following. In the Gemara it says that in the middle of the day the sun is very high up, and there's nothing that can block the sun rays except for the clouds. But from the afternoon and on, when the sun starts moving to the west, then it's possible that there are things that should block the sun rays. So Alter Rebbe said his opinion is that about 12 or 15 miles from here, towards the south, there must be a high mountain, and at the top of the mountain there must be trees, and probably these trees, the last 2 years, they grew to the point that they started to block the sun rays. And at 2 o'clock, that's when the sun is in a position where these trees block it. 5 o'clock, when the position of the sun is changed, they no longer block the sundial starts working again. The nobleman was very impressed with what the Alter Rebbe said, and he sent a special messenger to look at the area, which was 12, 15 miles away, and to see if there in fact is such a mountain and such trees. The man who was the head of the entire university, and he was a very famous scientist, a very famous engineer, he laughed at the Alter Rebbe's words. And he said, these Jews are really strange. Everything they know from the Talmud. Zelig the doctor, he knows how to cure people from the Talmud. Baruch the gardener, he knows how to improve the gardens from the Talmud. Zanvil the agent, he knows how to fool all the owners of the estates also from the Talmud. He knows how to deceive them. And naturally he was speaking in a very derogatory way. And then he added, and this young man here, he knows how the sun rays shine also, how they affect sundials through the Talmud. The Alter Rebbe answered him very calmly, the proof will be the axe that will chop off those that boast with their knowledge of science. So he said to the Alter Rebbe, this phrase is also from your Talmud? The Alter Rebbe said, no. This is the phrase of Galenus the Greek, and he said it about people that boast with their knowledge of science when it's really exaggerated and they overestimate their own greatness and their own knowledge. Rabbi Yehuda Leib Segel, the Alter Rebbe's father-in-law, was very hurt and very upset by the nasty remarks of this professor. When he got back home, he met with his non-Jewish acquaintances to speak with them. What can he do to show everyone how what the Alter Rebbe said is true? We will continue the story, Mitzvah Hashem, in the next lesson.